Welcome to Trench Diaries. Iron Coffins. Part 13.
I immediately reported to the commander's adjutant. He confirmed what I already knew, that I would be assigned to the U-boat watch officer's course shortly. The winter course was scheduled to begin in early December, and I wasn't exactly pleased about this impending change of location. I'd rather have preferred to continue at sea. However, after my exhausting frontline service, I didn't mind a few days of idleness and settled into a room with a magnificent view of Brest. After exploring the cool rooms of the fortress-like complex, I left the base to explore this ancient city. As I had been warned, Brest was a hotbed of espionage and sabotage. Members of the French resistance occasionally abducted and killed German soldiers. But I found the city peaceful and bustling. Cafes, bistros and shops flourished. The presence of countless Germans in uniform provided me with additional reassurance. It was a sunny day in November, the scent of autumn was in the air, and I decided to enjoy the world and the new life to the fullest. After a tasty fish dish, I strolled through the picturesque streets, visited one cafe after another, and browsed every bookstore I passed. In one of these stores, I saw Yvonne. She worked there. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and I asked her about some books she couldn't possibly have, and I managed to engage her in a conversation that ended with an invitation to dinner the next evening. The following day I left the base early in the morning. I feared that a sudden reassignment could shatter my plans. I visited the old fortifications of the city and spent the warm autumn day in the somewhat neglected but interesting neighborhoods of Brest. Long before the time came to meet Yvonne, I waited for her in a bistro across from town hall. Yvonne was graceful, elegant, delicate, but fearful as well. Her only contact with the Germans, she claimed, was the occasional remark at the store counter about books. But soon she found herself in an unpatriotic tete-a-tete with one of the intruders in the dim light of a discreet restaurant. The food was excellent, and dessert was further sweetened by her promise to see me again. The evening ended far too early at the garden gate of her house on the other side of the city. I met Yvonne again the next evening, not in daylight, as she didn't want to be seen with me in public. After sunset, under the cover of darkness, she was no longer as fearful. From that hour on, I became a regular guest at her apartment. Whenever I visited her, I carried my pistol and vigilantly watched the streets. I wanted a clear picture of my adversary in case I was being followed. I never asked Yvonne more than I needed to know, and she assured me that she loved me, and that was all that I wanted to hear. I savored those days filled with sunshine and fragrant autumn flowers to the fullest. However, after 2 weeks, I faced the difficult task of informing Yvonne about my new assignment. We agreed to reunite once I returned. I hoped to be back in Brest in the spring when my training was complete. The last thing I saw of Yvonne was her bright scarf dissolving into the night as my train slowly pulled out of the Brest station. Gare de Montparnasse in Paris. I decided to spend the entire day in Paris and then take the evening express train to Germany. I hurried through the Louvre, strolled up and down the Champs-Élysées, stood at the Place de l'Étoile, surveyed the city from the top of the Eiffel Tower, sat outside Café de la Paix and watched the passers-by. The next morning it was cool and foggy as my train crossed the Rhine near Mainz. But as I traveled through the pine forest south of Frankfurt, the sun had already dispelled the mist. The platform at the main train station was empty. Nobody was expecting me, because as usual I hadn't announced my arrival. I was used to it, and it should stay that way. I wasn't a fan of sentimental welcomes in public. Not far from the station square was my parents' apartment on the peaceful tree-lined Savigny-Straße. As I turned into the alley, a girl walked in front of me. I glanced once, twice, and recognized my sister. I called out to her, "Trudel!" She spun around and embraced me. "Why didn't you write that you were coming? We could have picked you up at the station. You look good. But it seems you've lost some weight." I told her, "I don't think so. It just appears this way since you haven't seen me in a year. How's father? How's mother?" Trudel tried to share all the news within the few minutes we had. Mother was overjoyed naturally. A year lay between this moment and my last leave. Mother didn't ask about the war. Her focus was mainly on my health and appetite. "You should have sent us a telegram," she said, "and I would have made a cake for you." Nonetheless, the cake was baked anyway. I spoke to father on the phone. He closed his office for the rest of the day and hurried home. "Hello there, old warrior," "How long of a leave did they give you this time?" he asked. "I'm not on leave, father. I'm just passing through on my way to the Baltic Sea, from one assignment to another. I only have about 30 hours I can spend here." "But that's far too short. Let's see what we can do with you in these hours." He consulted with mother and then began asking questions. How I earned my decorations, how a convoy battle is fought, and how depth charges affect the boat and crew. He also was eager to hear my views on our progress in the fight against England and wanted to know all the details about my patrol missions. However, our conversation soon shifted to a different topic that seemed to trouble him greatly. "Don't you think we're spreading our forces a bit thin across the European mainland?" he asked. "It seems to me that we have enough manpower to hold the occupied territories. But how many new fronts can we afford?" he asked skeptically. There was no answer to that, not yet at least. The question unsettled me a bit, and I steered the conversation back to more pleasant topics. That first evening at home and the following one were particularly enjoyable. The family home meant safety and comfort. It was an island of calm in the chaos of this war. Despite all my father's questions, I didn't share much about submarine warfare or the emotions that controlled me during battle. I wanted to leave my parents with the assurance that I would return again and again. When my train arrived in Berlin, it was freezing cold. Marianne was at the station, punctual as always. We walked through the nearly deserted streets to the nearby Hotel Fürstenhof, where I intended to stay this time. The hotel was a clear, albeit more expensive improvement over the simple accommodations we had to settle for during my earlier visits. But with my improved salary, I could afford this extravagance, and Marianne made me forget that the war was raging around us and that I had been on active duty at sea throughout the summer and fall. During the 2 days of my visit, we rushed from one entertainment to another. To the chagrin of critics, the war had greatly affected Berlin's cultural life and the quality of events. Another significant deterioration was the quality of the meals offered in the restaurants on Kurfürstendamm. No, Berlin was no longer the old Berlin. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees centigrade when I arrived in Königsberg on the last day of November. Shivering in my lightweight uniform, I managed to catch the local train to Pillau. Frozen stiff, I arrived at the small harbor at the Frisches Haff and shortly after boarded the luxurious ocean liner Pretoria, the headquarters of the 1st U-boat Training Division. During breakfast there was a big reunion. I shook hands with many crewmates and friends, and we celebrated our joint promotion to Oberfähnrich extensively at the bar. We had come together from all over Europe. 7 months separated our farewell party in April from this bitterly cold first day of December 1941. The practical part of the watch officer course began under extremely challenging conditions. The port of Pillau was completely covered in ice, some spots with layers up to 30 centimeters thick. Icebreakers were constantly at work to keep the waterways open for traffic and allow our submarines access to the Baltic Sea. We went to sea day and night, taking turns assuming the roles of the commanding officer and chief engineer. Our instructors, experienced commanders, taught us all the tricks of nocturnal surface attacks and daytime underwater attacks. Dive maneuvers were deliberately disrupted, and we sweated blood to keep our boats from sinking. Soon we could perform routine and emergency procedures in our sleep, but we hardly ever had enough rest to recover from the strenuous exercises and rigorous demands of the course. And yet, there were quieter days. The flotilla commander, Korvettenkapitän Schuhart, was an outstanding instructor, and we listened to his first-hand accounts with particular interest. Schuhart had sunk the British aircraft carrier Courageous as a U-boat commander in the autumn of 1939 and had been awarded the Knight's Cross for this and other achievements. I spent the weekends on board the Pretoria, reading a book, playing skat, or discussing the reasons that might have led Japan to attack the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. This directly drew the United States into the war. The battles in the Philippines and the Pacific Ocean, however, were too distant to be of greater interest to us. Nevertheless, I was aware that events in the Far East would deeply influence the U-boat war in the Atlantic. With the US entering the war, and especially our maritime struggle, the prospects for the future changed almost overnight. We had reason to prepare for a long war. The Battle of the Atlantic, however, was progressing well. Our radio stations played the victory fanfare daily, informing the population of our boats' triumphs at sea and tallying up ships and tonnage that were sent to the seabed by torpedoes. Nearly 3 million tons, including the Luftwaffe sinkings, had been destroyed in 1941. The British still remained unable to withstand the mounting pressure. Entire convoys were decimated, often left to our ravenous sea wolves without resistance. Of course, we also suffered losses. In December of the previous year, once again one of our most experienced commanders was lost. Kapitänleutnant Endras, commander of U-567, who had destroyed over 200,000 tons of enemy shipping, was sunk near Gibraltar. There were no survivors. Our training in Pillau continued until the end of January 1942. In early February I was again ordered to the Naval School in Flensburg with my comrades to become better acquainted with torpedo weapons. 6 weeks of instruction aboard the luxury liner Patria, combined with live firing exercises, enlightened me about the final secrets of this weapon. Courses in naval tactics and communication followed as the winter loosened its harsh grip. With the arrival of spring, I was promoted to Leutnant zur See. At this point I was in Swinemünde, where I attended the artillery course to complete my training as a watch officer. After some mock battles at sea and a farewell gathering with my newly promoted crewmates, I impatiently awaited my new assignment, which I hoped would call me back to the front. I thought about our celebrations in Lorient and Yvonne in Brest, wishing that everything would repeat itself. However, Admiral Dönitz had different plans for Lieutenant Werner. I was instructed to report to U-612 in Danzig as the first officer of the watch. I was instructed to report to U-612 in Danzig as the first watch officer. I read the telegram twice before comprehending its content. There, in black and white, it stated that I had been appointed as the second in command on a new U-boat. The prospect of becoming a U-boat commander myself suddenly came within reach. On May 19th I arrived in Danzig. I found U-612 at the shipyard. The boat, weathered and worn by the sea, gently rocked alongside an old stone jetty. A sentry confirmed that the commander was on board, and I climbed through the forward hatch into the bow compartment. I found the commander in his small niche and said, "Reporting for duty on board, Herr Oberleutnant." "Welcome, I'm Oberleutnant Siegmann, Paul Siegmann. I've been waiting for you since yesterday. We are ready to sail. Come, I want you to meet the other officers on board." And with Herbert joining U-612, I think we'll end this episode right here. Yeah, lots of traveling and training this time, and next to Herbert being a ladies' man, a few interesting things in this episode. One, Engelbert Endras, who Herbert talks about, died when his boat was sunk with all hands on December 21st, 1941. Endras was indeed one of the most successful U-boat captains of World War II, sinking almost 120,000 tons. As a young first lieutenant, Endras was actually on board U-47 when she infiltrated Scapa Flow, and so he was part of this very famous attack on the British home fleet. Another fact, Herbert's new boat U-612 shares her number with the boat that is portrayed in the reboot of Das Boot, no pun intended, which was released in 2018 as a TV series, but this series was so bad that we won't talk about it here. But safe to say, the events in this abomination of a show do not reflect U-612's actual wartime experience, so off to new adventures it is. If you like this episode, appease the algorithm by liking, commenting and subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers!